Hello, hello, hello. Leavers and believers, welcome to Leaving Hillsong. My name's Tanya, and if you are joining us for the first time, it's a humdinger of a day to be a part of this wild conversation about some wild times that haven't really ended. They've calmed down, but yeah. So, and if you're a return leaver, welcome back. This is a jam-packed, fun-filled episode, I tell you, with some names dropped and some stories told. Last week we were with Gail and Nate. Gail is a Canadian and she says a boat and stuff, and it's really good. She does it in this episode. And Nate is a native New Yorker. And they both come from evangelical backgrounds. If you haven't listened to part one of A Strong Buff Jesus, you'll really enjoy it. Make sure you do that. If you can't be bothered, I'll just give you a recap. So these guys have eventually met after many years of duking it out with the evangelical powers that be, which kind of end up being ourselves. We left off last time with asking Nate if there were any of the big names, and yeah, he really did see some things in New York, which of course eventually became the East Coast campus. So you can look forward to some flying punches at Carl, at some of the other big names going around. But overall, we're looking at a culture, and Nate does such a fantastic job of describing the culture and the power and the ruthlessness of the organisation known as Hillsong by individuals and within the culture itself. So thank you for joining us. Again, it's a longer episode, but I just keep going, this part's good. Oh yeah, okay, no, I mean, well. So, there's just so much good stuff. I hope you really enjoy A Strong Buff Jesus, part 2, with Nate and Gail.
And, if there were any, specific slides that the pastor wanted the video team to put up on the screen, all of that stuff, and we would have that little meeting. Because, God forbid the pastor actually goes and talks to a video switcher himself.
So, if we're talking the big names here, are you rubbing shoulders with the big boys at this point? Is that...
not the big boys. I mean, like the
the
guys who fathom themselves to be big boys.
Yeah,
they all do.
Yeah, everybody. Guys like Josh Kimes was a regular occurrence at these meetings. Matt Bargis was there a lot. Matt and Lindsay. I worked with a lot. I had to deal with their toxicity in so many ways. Particularly Matt. One of my good friends had to deal with Lindsay more, but Matt was somebody that I struggled with on a very regular basis. I had a run-in with him where basically an exchange service, a Wednesday evening service, did not go well. He basically
technology was bugging out on him, and Nate was stuck with the buck.
I was the producer that night, and Matt was like, that whole thing was a shit show, and you
wait, he actually used the word shit show. Yeah, he did. To describe what you all the work you put in.
Yeah, he called it a shit show, and honestly, it's like it's a Wednesday.
And
I work a 9 to 5. I left work early.
Wow.
And I'm sorry, I didn't leave work. That time I didn't leave work early because I was stuck at work. So I ended up showing up later than my normal call time, which was still like an hour before the service started. But the production team had already gone through the process of setting things up, and things weren't exactly the way they were supposed to be, which was causing a lot of technical issues. We were running late, so we had to open doors and we had to just do what we could. But the service just wasn't running the way it should. Mics weren't working properly, and we had to. It was like flying by the seat of our pants, kind of.
So he said it was a shit show.
Yeah, he called a debrief of the team leads, and then he singled me out. He was like, "That thing was a shit show. Everybody was to blame, but production just that was."
But
yeah, it was really it was production.
But
was
you,
the
Nate.
Issue. Yeah, and then he looks at me. He goes, "Nate, you didn't set me up for a win."
For a win. Like it's a baseball game and you're
a horse race. See, there's so much gambling in this culture as well, so much risk taking. It's interesting, that influence as well. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I dealt with Matt his toxicity on a pretty regular basis. Josh Kimes had very few run-ins with him, but as far as that kind of thing goes, but I saw him regularly. I met with him very regularly because he was often in Montclair. I only had like 2 or 3 occasions where I had to meet with Carl, where he sort of made a surprise visit to the campus
and you were
that I was
so excited to meet your pastor for the first time. This is so wild. Yeah, you're laughing, Tanya, but like it's so not normal.
No, it really is not. This is not healthy in any way, shape, or form. Not that pastoral roles are terribly healthy in general.
But like to think your pastor is some celebrity, that you're so cool to have met your pastor, that's not normal.
Yeah, to talk about the fact that you had a conversation with Carl. Like, ooh, like I got to talk to Carl.
Like
how ridiculous is that?
He's such a celebrity.
Yeah, that's
so kept away from the average church person that it's a big deal to actually have a conversation with him.
So like a couple of meetings, but when Carl would make a surprise visit and like our creative team leads, who were the ones allowed to talk to Carl on a normal basis, like, if Carl showed up and he didn't let, Chris Davenport know that he was coming in or he was showing up at our campus rather than like Midtown or downtown or whatever, he was going to preach from Montclair. So, who's the service producer?
Who's going to roll out the red carpet for Carl Lentz?
Yeah. So I had to meet with him, but of course, it was very, under strict guidelines and all of that. And it happened.
Wait, what do you mean by strict guidelines to meet with your own pastor? What does that mean?
Like they
not have guidelines
he had his like guy
know what the
that was
guidelines
always
are.
walking around with him, like his bodyguard. I think it was Luke Termini at the
What
time.
kind of pastors needs
Right.
bodyguards?
Well, cool ones.
Exactly. Cult leaders.
This sounds normal in New York, but nowhere else. Like, I don't know how.
Yeah. So
Oh, really?
so yeah, like Luke was always by his side, and I couldn't let other people in with, like, I couldn't have a 2IC with me. 2IC being like second in command was how, like, the lingo that they had there. So I couldn't have a 2IC with me. So there was no training that was going on in those meetings. Like if I was training another producer, I couldn't bring them in with me into a meeting with Carl.
Wow, he was too important.
Yeah, that was kind of what was going on in the green room, the pastor's green room. That was the extent of other people going into the pastor's green room. Yeah. So
Were you guys aware at all of like what had been going on in Australia? Because as soon as you say 2014, I'm thinking that's when we had the Royal Commission.
yeah.
That's when these guys were the peoples of America aware of what was going on behind the scenes, or like
To a
long time
degree.
ago?
Yeah,
Far away
so-
place a long time ago, right? Like,
Yeah, and
really?
I think that's how it was billed to us. There was a lot of sort of downplaying of the severity of what it was. There was this kind of sense of that's something, that's going on over there, and it doesn't have too much to do with us here.
Brian almost felt like the monarchy, like a figurehead.
Yeah, there was.
yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
So he wasn't, he obviously wasn't actively involved in what we were doing. We didn't really have a sense, aside from like his annual visits, we didn't really have a sense for who he was. And when he would show up, he wasn't terribly appealing. I remember that feeling of like, who is this guy and why is he talking like this? He doesn't know anything about what's going on. Like the things that he would say, oh God. I remember my friend Janice, our friend Janice, who was at Hillsong New York from its inception, and even prior, before it was announced it was going to be Hillsong New York, and she'd come from Hillsong College. But she often remarks, like when Brian came into town and he would preach, she would cringe. Just this feeling of like,
Right.
oh, this guy he has no idea. Like, why is he saying these things? What? Like
He's like
not
that guy at the party, and you're just like, stop, please. Like, who's he with? Who did he come with?
Yeah.
Who did he? So
we hear about this stuff going on, and then I think it was sort of billed to us as like, I remember in my mind that like the way I saw it, and I feel like the way I explained it away to myself was, well, Brian wasn't the pedophile, and he's not. And of course, Brian did a lot of work to make it seem like he was the founding pastor and not his dad. So, it was, the church wasn't founded by a pedophile. Brian isn't the pedophile. And, Brian has been as transparent as he can be. He's not responsible for his father's actions.
Because he told you he was being transparent, and so he was.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah.
Right. And it was being billed to us that way. And I think there was a lot of, on our part, we were just sort of like, well, we're doing our thing, and that's just whatever's going on in Australia. That's not our business. They'll take care of it,
Yeah.
We were sort of isolated in that regard.
And I mean, Australia must seem like a faraway place. How was that? Was it marketed as that kind of Eden that I've been told it was like, must be a pure religion, comes from such a paradise place or something?
We saw Sydney as the Vatican, I think. I don't know if that like exactly, but like
when Nate hears Australian accents, even today, it has an impact on him.
It's tough.
It has some triggering effects related to Hillsong.
Wow. Okay. Like emotional kind of. Warm.
We can handle you, Tanya.
Yeah,
because you're not a dude with a hills with a
Yeah. Honestly, it is. It's like guys with Australian accents definitely have that. It is sort of emotionally intense for me because it. Whenever I hear, especially like walking around New York City, and I hear an Australian accent, I'm like, oh my god, is that somebody that I know?
Right.
Is that someone from Hillsong?
Yeah. Okay. What was Carl speaking with? I mean,
Carl had, his Virginia boy attempt at sounding like he was from New York.
Right.
But the thing is, Carl also didn't preach every Sunday. We were getting, on a Sunday to Sunday basis, we were getting Josh Kimes, Kane Keating. I know Matt Bargis is West Virginia, so he's not Australian. But like, those were the guys that we were hearing from Sunday to Sunday. And occasionally because Carl was always traveling around the country.
So cool.
Speaking at other churches. He was at VOO Church or at...
VOO? Is that actually the name of it?
Yeah, there's a church called VOO Church. He was at VOO Church.
Sorry, because I speak French. Yeah. This is even more entertaining for me that they named a church VOO.
Yeah, so he would visit there. He would visit his buddy Judah Smith. He would visit his church home. Yeah, Mosaic in LA. He would go, he was just doing the tour.
He's so important. He's just busy.
He was so important.
And yet adaptable.
What's that?
Well, he fits in everywhere, apparently.
Oh, yeah.
Like a chameleon that can adapt to.
He's so important that he has to be away from the place that he's supposedly the pastor. Right?
I mean, Brian was always away. Brian was always away out seeking more and, whatever it is.
I'm sure he's going and collecting donations for, for Hillsong, quote unquote.
Air quotes.
Yeah. Just raking in the cash wherever he could. So yeah, like conference, right? We had,
which conference?
Yeah. So conference, I think it was 2015, 2016.
That was eye-opening for you, right?
Yeah. Conference was sort of like the first moment where I started to notice like this whole thing is unhealthy. And I remember I saw the divide between like the quote unquote lower level volunteers and like the mid-tier volunteers.
Wow.
Like the upper echelon volunteer. Right. At the time I was dating a girl who I don't remember where she was volunteering, but they had her in with the army of like 300 some odd volunteers, and they were trapped in this little room with no chairs. They had to like sit on the floor, and they were being fed like practically mass produced ham sandwiches, peanut butter sandwiches, and so on and so forth. Right. Like just like the cheap ass white bread stuffed in a little.
Wait, and at conference they were there from early on.
Yeah. Like call time for a lot of people was 6 a.m. and you wouldn't leave until midnight.
So they were working their butts off and eating peanut butter and jelly from the church as their compensation.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, it's not, that's deliberate as well. I mean,
absolutely. Oh,
they
yeah.
Not afford an extra Twinkie.
Right. So, because here's the thing too, like the mid-tier, upper echelon volunteers, they got to go to the hot food buffet with like the steaks and the scrambled egg, bacon, sausages, the hot coffee, all of it.
Ooh, it's behind this door. Ooh, the hot buffet.
Right. And we had, different credentials that provided us different access to different areas. And I remember like being in line for there and like thinking, ooh, can I sneak out a plate for my girlfriend?
because the rarity, the kind of musical chairs thing, there's just not quite enough. But if you try harder, you might make it up to steak level, right? Like, and it justifies the peanut butter, right?
Right.
Course
Oh,
I
yeah.
anything.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
One of the kind of things that's kind of upsets me the more we look at this is the more you realize how easy it is to kind of get people to behave like trained circus animals, really. It doesn't take too much. They must just be looking back going, well, this is just too easy. which is what makes them even more reprehensible, right?
Oh, yeah.
The classism that they're trying to instill in them. And you have like backstage passings with different colors or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. There was like certain stickers that would go on your credential that, would be checked to see. Oh yeah. And I misplaced my credential at one point and I got chewed out by my team lead because they were like, could you imagine what would happen if somebody found,
what would happen
like,
if
God
people
forbid.
found out there was all these class layers at Hillsong?
Like, and not like, it's not like they would even know what it meant. Like, oh, this credential provides it. Like, how would they even find their way through the labyrinth that was Prudential Center? Like,
you needed to rip off one of the high pastor's credentials and see where it led you into which doors.
Right. Although they didn't carry credentials because they were so recognizable with their bodyguards and everything.
With their bodyguards.
They didn't have.
It's so insane.
Yeah.
So what happens to you at conference that makes this, like, by the end of conference?
So there was that. There was the the eye opening. Seeing the difference between the two. Essentially castes of volunteer, different classes of volunteer. And then there was the chewing out that I got, just the incredible time. And this was a fellow volunteer. This was somebody who was my peer on a Sunday to Sunday basis, who suddenly got a little taste of power and used that to ream me out for misplacing my credential. And I just remember very vividly thinking, like, I don't want to replicate this. And I've got a feeling, like, and this is when I recognized, like, these things are happening wide scale. So I made a decision that weekend that on Sunday, A, I'm never going to do that kind of thing to my team. And B, I'm gonna do what I can to protect my team from that kind of toxicity. And I think I noticed that that's a thread for a lot of my friends who have left. That's a common thread. Like, at least one of their steps on their way out is like, I'm here to protect the people that report to me or that are in my Connect group or whatever, that I'm here to protect them from the toxicity that's above me.
You're literally staying at church to protect people from abuse. And that's somehow a normal part of the church experience.
Yeah. Oh, it's because it's widespread. Like, every single person that I know who left there, who was either a Connect group leader or who was a team leader that I've spoken to. There are a few people that I know have left that I was close to, but I haven't talked to them about their exit. But the people that I have talked to about their exit from Hillsong, they have all said that at one point, or for one phase of their exit, they convinced themselves that the reason they were there was to protect the people around them from the toxicity of the leadership, either immediately above them or 2 levels above them or whatever.
I've heard Hillsong people say, like, oh, well, I know the church wasn't affirming, so I'm staying there so that my gay friends know that I will keep them safe. And it's not just Hillsong that does that. In evangelical churches, that's common. But it's so, looking back for me, it's just, wow. It's horrible.
Well, you've got to be the light in the world in the church.
You be the light to the church.
Yeah.
It's like,
and that's
the sheep from the sheep.
From the sheep,
from the wolves that are in the church,
right? From the sheep that have been given a wolf's outfit.
Shepherds in cosplaying pastors. I don't know. But yes, and I mean, again, I think that's about we are taught to devalue ourselves. We're essentially worthless. And you, sir, I mean, you undercut Judas. So, I mean, I don't know about you. But we will go and defend others. And I mean, I think that sounds all kind of really valid, especially when there's that constant crisis and busyness. And what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? And, but I've still got to do this by 4:00. So, you do what you can.
Not even the busyness, but like the worthwhileness of yourself being so linked in terms of the environment, teaching you that these people are important and you're less. They're way ahead of you and they're so important and you are so not important. Like, just reinforcing that the devaluation of yourself as a human. How could you volunteer that long and be just stuck with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches?
Well, that's the thing too, because it was a one weekend or like Thursday, Friday, Saturday out of the year. Like honestly, there weren't a whole lot of repeat volunteers from year to year.
There was a lot of Hillsong burnout from what I
Oh
understand.
yeah, there was a lot of volunteer burnout. And it's just like, the thing is, they convince you that it's your fault if you feel this way, especially people who have even an ounce of power. There's something in that world that convinces you that this power is worth it, to walk all over people and then to treat them the way that Hillsong convinces you to treat them. For what purpose? Like, I still cannot, I don't get it. Like, does this save souls? But even then, like, I don't know. It still boggles my mind. I'm at a loss.
That toxicity you talk about, it's I don't know anybody who hasn't been screamed at, and I'm yet to hear a pastor's name who wasn't a screamer. So
Wow.
whatever this thing is, and I mean, this same leader might have been fantastic in 19 out of 20 situations, but I'm telling you, somebody's got a story where he lost his mind.
Yep.
And, you know, it's a culture, is it a personality? How do you then kind of take it from there? I mean, at what point do you get a break to think, I guess?
So, I think what happened after conference was Sunday felt like a relief, and I was, back with my team, back with the people that I felt like most connected with, and then you just sort of get into that routine, and over time, I started to feel like this just doesn't feel worthwhile. It feels like a slog. I'm just tired all the time. I also started volunteering. I played and coached ice hockey, and I started volunteering as an ice hockey coach for this nonprofit where we were like bringing hockey to kids in the inner city who couldn't afford to actually play hockey. And so we teach them how to ice skate. We teach them how to stick handle the puck. We do all the things. And I was wanting to devote more time to this. It was so much fun. I get to coach a team. I get to like play with kids on the ice.
I told Tanya during the break, hockey is how you and I
Yeah.
were meeting and getting together because you were a Habs fan. I like Montreal Canadiens hockey fan. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was getting very, very involved in this organization, coaching hockey, and it was a fulfilling volunteer experience.
Completely different than Hillsong
Yeah.
in terms of the vibe.
Yeah. I mean, Hillsong was just draining. I just remember feeling every Sunday like not wanting to go and just being drained afterwards. And then like getting a text from one of the other coaches who was saying like, hey, we beat this team or, whatever. Like, and I just wished I was there instead of at Hillsong. And then at the same time, I was also very involved in an organization called Brew Theology, which was interfaith conversations. And it was interfaith conversations at pubs and breweries and whatnot. So I was having conversations about Buddhism, about Taoism, Shinto, all like
Things you can talk about inside of evangelicalism anyway, because there's
letting
lots of
demons into your life is what.
Yeah, exactly. I was letting Satan to take over. Yeah.
Okay, but you're having life-giving conversations and life-giving volunteer experience.
Yeah.
Just quickly, like while you've been talking, I'm thinking, you said you had been, you signed up for something within a month of being there. And I'm wondering if that's part of the push, is because once you've got people involved with 2, 3, 5, 10 people, they're not going to leave.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
And that was one of the things that was keeping me, was this feeling of like, these people, I care about these people. I care about my Connect group. I care about and I wasn't leading a Connect group though, but of course I was getting the push. Like, Nate, when are you going to start leading your own Connect
But
group?
you were attending one?
Yeah, I was a part of a Connect group and I loved the people there. I loved my team. I didn't want to subject them to the people that were directly above me. But then I think it was maybe during one of those Brew Theology conversations, somebody who had left an evangelical church kind of just made a comment like, if I don't leave a place where it's just unhealthy and toxic, the message that it sends isn't that like I'm staying there for those people that I'm trying to protect or whatever. The message that it sends is that I agree with what the leadership
Yeah,
is doing and
condoning
stands
it,
for.
yeah.
That's such an important thing.
And so, and that hit me, and I was like, oh, so that's actually what I'm doing. That's what the message is being perceived as. Yeah, but like to your point of like, within a month, I was signed up for a team. I was plugged in, and I was on a trajectory towards leading teams. Somebody, usually Carl had his little thing where he would say, "If you ain't helping, you ain't helping," and like
Try and guilt people.
yeah, to guilt people into serving, to signing up for, to basically to dive into the machine, to get, plugged into the matrix.
You're part of the problem kind of thing. Right. Totally. Yeah.
Right. So
It's clever.
yeah.
Really
So
cool.
so those other experiences that I was having outside of church, they ended up being much more fulfilling. And church was like that thing in my schedule that was preventing me from enjoying those other aspects of my life.
And when you were involved at church, you weren't setting him up for a win, Nate.
Yeah.
You weren't setting him up for a win. What a fulfilling church experience for you.
Yeah, exactly. No, I was getting reamed out. I was getting yelled at. I was getting reamed out.
That you didn't leave work early in order to volunteer.
Yeah.
And then you're getting reamed out about it
Yeah.
because it's not going perfectly.
Yeah. So that was what prompted me. And that was in 2017 was when I think I bowed out. But I didn't have, like, my brain hadn't really.
This is before everything exploded
Yeah.
that you left.
Yeah. So, and it was right as things were getting really exciting at Hillsong NYC, right?
Okay.
They were just starting to launch their Connecticut and Boston campuses.
They were expanding Colonial Hillsong.
Yeah, Hillsong colonies, the Hillsong colonizers. And Hillsong East Coast was just about to become a thing. Like they were rebranding from Hillsong NYC to Hillsong East Coast. And I remember like one of my leaders saying like, are you sure you want to, step back now? Because like this is when we all
Look at all the good things God is doing that you're going to miss out on.
And like all hands on, like we need all the help we can get.
Well, the best is yet to come, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. The best,
Exactly.
the best is yet to come.
He does a good Brian Houston. You haven't done it
Yeah.
too much, but like he really does a good
Yeah.
Brian
Oh, he
Houston.
got. I don't know how good it is, but he with the things that he would say in the middle of a sermon, he would just be like, just talking about whatever nonsense he's talking about, but then he always stamped it with "in Jesus' name," just to make. just to give it that little, like he could literally just say something like, I got a cell phone call, and this call was from a friend of mine. In Jesus' name.
Yeah.
And suddenly
Is that
it's
giving you flashbacks, Tanya?
suddenly it's not.
voice as well, because it's like
I know, right? I know. Yeah. And
somebody
excuse me
give him a
while-
lozenge, please. It's been 40 years already.
just those 10 seconds really did a number on me.
Oh, man. It's like doing a Gollum voice.
Yeah, it is. It's like, so yeah, like I remember I walked away at that time just feeling like something really was off. And I spent like about a year and change away from church in general. But as I was away,
You took a longer than 2 week break.
I did. I took a longer than two week break that time. But as I was away, that's when things started to coalesce in my mind. Like I had time to self-reflect. And that's when I started recognizing like, oh my God, that was all just plain toxic. Like how the hell I used to pride myself on like just being a little savvier than your average white evangelical. But like I got sucked into that machine so easily.
Again, I mean, we I don't forget which podcast we brought this up in, but I mean, it's such a sophisticated marketing machine. And like any abusive relationship, like any toxic relationship, there are some great times. So it's like, otherwise it would be easy if it were bad all the time and there weren't good people
That's a really good
involved
point.
and connected. If these were monsters, it would be easy. But there's a lot of
Exactly.
good points. Positive
Yeah,
things.
because look, it was cool. Like and like I was saying, like I was so drawn into the production, and then to be a part of that production and to be a service producer,
You're contributing
like-
to all the things God is doing in the world, Nate.
yeah. But also just on like a selfish level, I got to be a part of the thing that I wanted. Like I loved that stuff since I was a kid in high school.
You're a creative type.
Yeah. As a musician, as a singer, as a, I just being in that environment just was intoxicating for me.
It must have seemed like your destiny.
It did. It really did.
God called you for such a time as this.
Right, in your right place in the right time in history and all that kind of. But no, really, I mean, you've been brought up your whole life to be right there, right? You're getting better and bigger, and makes sense.
And so, by the time I left in 2017. By the time the stuff, I guess to essentially use the cliche, by the time the shit hit the fan, I had been out. Sorry, Tanya's mom. I'd been out for a couple of years at that point, but. There was still a part of me that was thinking, oh, but like, it can't be as bad as we all think it is. When Carl initially when Brian sent out that statement and then Carl initially posted on Instagram, I was thinking, oh, maybe it's not as bad. Maybe it's bad in the evangelical world, but not so bad like in general. But like, no, it was as bad and worse as the news comes out. And like at the time, and there's still a part of me that thinks to a degree that this was the case, that like all of it was a little too convenient, that, the news about Carl came out when it did.
You think Hillsong knew about that a long time before?
Oh, they knew long before. I'm sure Brian was well aware that he was keeping that information in his back pocket for an opportune moment. Because look, like Carl... The thing was, like we were saying, Brian he's not an attractive, he's not a draw. He's not
some people think he's the greatest preacher that ever walked the face of the earth. This is what fascinates me.
I don't get it.
But you think that he was jealous of Carl Lentz?
I think here's the thing too, right? A narcissist can't, if they have the same goal.
If there's two of them, they're going to eat each other alive.
Yeah. They ultimately had the same goal. And Carl, here's the thing, Carl would have been fine without Hillsong. Carl didn't need the Hillsong. At that point, what was that? Like
he already had the celebrities in his back pocket, right? He had the Jenners and he had Bieber
Justin Bieber,
Selena Gomez.
Yeah.
He already had
Kyrie Irving. He had it all.
Celebrity status. Was it Knicks?
Yeah. So Carl didn't need the Hillsong brand. At least from the way I saw it at the time. And in fact, the Hillsong brand was probably holding him back, unless Carl could be the one steering the ship.
That was not going to happen.
Right, but that wasn't going to happen as long as Brian was alive. And I'm sure Brian calculated things. I'm sure he saw Carl's celebrity status and
used
made
them when
the decision
he was convenient for him.
Right, and made the decision to, because again, convenience, right? Because Carl, you were mentioning. Brian kind of drooling over Carl in those interviews, which, because I'm sure Brian said, like, look at how popular this guy is. I brought him in. I put him in charge of Hillsong NYC. I did that. I created that. And so there's a sense, there's an element of pride in that. But then as Carl got a book deal. How many Hillsong pastors get a book deal? Carl was one of the only ones outside of the Houstons themselves. And does Christine Kane have a book? I think she might have a book. I don't even remember. But
yeah, I mean, she didn't write her own one, but that's...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard not... I mean, the cynical part of me is just thinking like, look, and not to say... Look, that's the thing. I don't want to absolve Carl of his guilt and complicity in that. Because he, like we know how toxic of a person he is. Like we saw it in the Discovery Plus documentary, what he did at Wave Church before Hillsong. So of course that just translates into more of the same while he's at Hillsong. But I think it was just sort of opportune for Brian to say, like, this guy is going to eclipse me. And if Carl, see, the thing is, if Carl had left Hillsong without that scandal becoming public, I think he would have taken 90% of the Hillsong NYC population with him and started his own thing. Because Hillsong NYC, I think by and large,
they were loyal to Carl Lentz.
Yeah, we couldn't have given two shits about the Houstons for the most part. I think if push came to shove, we would have, as a congregation, would have gone with Carl.
With your cool leather jacket.
Yeah, Carl spoke to the New York culture.
He's great. It was terrific. You know, they sold their house like 5 days before the announcement or something.
Oh, yeah.
The Lentzes.
Carl and Laura lived.
They live nearby you.
Yeah, Carl and Laura lived in Montclair.
They lived in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Right nearby here.
Just right before their big announcement, they sold their house like 5 days before or something.
Yeah. Which we didn't know until after the fact. I didn't know until, but of course at that point I was sort of like done. I was not really.
You were following the news from a distance after you'd left of what was going on with Carl. Yeah. I
didn't even like pay too much attention until the headlines hit. And honestly, I didn't think too much about my Hillsong experience after about a year or two after leaving. I didn't give it too much thought until the news dropped. And then the news about Carl, but what hit me more was the news about Darnell, because but Darnell was a guy that I crossed paths with and rubbed shoulders with a lot. Like, he
was a New Jersey guy.
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
what did Darnell do for the people?
So Darnell, I know you can't. It's all a thing. So Darnell was one of the pastors at Hillsong in the Montclair location of Hillsong NYC, and he sent DMs to a former Hillsong volunteer that essentially, I mean, it's a little bit more complex than that, but essentially he sent dick pics to one of the former volunteers.
And to be friends with.
Who I found, and it didn't dawn on me. Like I read the article and I didn't even like think about checking to see who this person was until I ran into her at a friend's wedding. And I was like, oh my God, did you hear about Darnell? And she's like, I was the one he sent the picture to. I was like, oh.
You're like, that was you. You blew the whistle on this thing.
You're the one who blew the whistle on that whole thing. And it was just
It's so cool how those circles work as well. And it's interesting.
Sitting around at a reception discussing Hillsong nonsense.
Yeah. At a friend's wedding, who I don't want to like steal the thunder of his story, but he's had enough, and I don't think he really wants to revisit it himself. So, and but
he had his own Hillsong.
He had his own Hillsong experiences that included Matt and Lindsay Bargis. Basically, like, he was engaged to somebody who was essentially married to Hillsong already, and so he was like, "Well, when is this relationship going to include me?" And Matt and Lindsay were basically like, well, you have to recognize that her primary relationship was with the church.
The pastors are letting him know your future wife is married to the church before you.
I mean, it used to be, you've got to understand her primary relationship is with God or with Jesus, but
the church is Jesus. They are Jesus.
That language thing, it's so interchangeable.
It is.
You've had so many different kinds of. There's been so many ingredients that have gone into your worldview. I don't know how easy it is for you to pull them apart and look at each one. Was the leaving of Hillsong different? And if so, how so? Did it have a different impact than Bob Jones or
the other?
Yes. I mean, and the reason, first of all, I spent more time away from church after leaving Hillsong because I was so burned out on church. And I think by that point, I was also starting to really question: do I even believe in any of this? This whole this God thing, You
start asking the bigger questions.
Yeah, that's when those questions started to hit. And sure, if I look at my history, the trajectory was there to a degree, but Hillsong served as the biggest point I could have reached, because I was at that. My journey through evangelicalism was from smaller church, bigger and bigger, going bigger and bigger and bigger.
You hit the big time,
and that was that.
You hit the prime time.
That was essentially as far as you could go. Sure, there are some churches that might be, bigger than Hillsong, but didn't have necessarily the global reach or the recognition that Hillsong had. And I think for me, leaving Hillsong encapsulated more than just leaving Hillsong. It encapsulated leaving evangelicalism, leaving Christianity to a degree. I would eventually find my way back, but nowhere near the same way. Leaving my belief in God. Even though I do identify as a Christian now, I probably don't believe in God. Some days I might, some days I think I would probably say
I don't know.
You're agnostic.
How does that work? You either, lay down your brothers and sisters and leave and follow me and become fishers of crypto and men. I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me, there's this sense of Jesus was an interesting character who had his existence and his time on earth had a lot of political ramifications in the Roman Empire, in Palestine, in the Jewish tradition, as a Jewish rabbi. But I'm of the mindset now, I used to be like, everything is the word of God, and you do not question the word of God. But I'm of the mindset now that, like, take it or leave it. If there are things that Jesus said that I'm not comfortable with, I don't have to be comfortable with them, and I don't have to take them. But if he said some things that are meaningful, then I can take them. Like any author that, or like, wisdom tradition that I might like look into, there are some things that resonate with me and that I can grasp onto, and there are things that don't. Jesus as a political figure, Jesus as a sort of revolutionary, I resonate with that. I resonate with what he did politically in the face of a massive empire. Jesus as like the divine son of God, that doesn't fit with me.
Rambo Jesus, like John Cena Jesus.
Jesus with the tattoo on his thigh.
Masculine WWE Jesus didn't work for you anymore. But I'm wondering how much Hillsong for you. I don't know, Tanya, if you're like me, because we were discussing ADHD and neurodivergence before amongst us, but do you think in metaphors like me? Like, are you big metaphor, right? Like ADHD? Yes.
Everything's
so I think in metaphors, and there's two that pop into my head with Hillsong, your last experience, Nate. And one of them is from Hamilton, The Room Where It Happens, where it's like, it talks about how you get to see how the sausage gets made.
Yeah.
That was one of the lines in the song of like, getting to see in the room where it happens, where stuff really goes down. I feel like Hillsong was eye-opening. And the other metaphor for me is in The Wizard of Oz, where they pull back, Toto pulls back the curtain and they see who's really operating this shit and what he's doing. What he's operating this crap and what he's doing.
I mean, because that's what you're saying. It was like you hit the heights and then there wasn't anything bigger.
Right.
I wonder what that crash was like. And how did your evangelical family take this new point of view that you've got here now?
These are hard-hitting questions, Tanya. You're really throwing the hard ones.
And we're bleeding on every page here. It's trauma porn. Go.
So I would say that, I have good days and bad days with my family, and I'm encouraged by the sense of loyalty that my family has to me. Despite the fact that they certainly are uncomfortable with my exit from evangelicalism, both myself and my brother. And, far be it from me to tell my brother's story, but, my brother has his own story, having been a worship leader and one of the key creative team leads in Hillsong NYC for a number of years. And then for him to just be like, yeah, I'm out. I'm done.
Peace out.
Yeah.
It breaks my heart. I'm like, we've spent a few hours talking. You're such a nice guy. You're such a good person. And it's like good days and bad days with your family since what? Since you got out of prison for murder? No.
Right.
It's such a deep system of belief that it's hard for people who haven't exited out to understand like what they imagine to be all truth and all good. And the only way to look at this, it's very difficult to exit out of that way of looking at things.
Yeah. To be fair to my family, like they've all left Hillsong. Anytime that there has been some hurt or harm that was inflicted on myself or my brother, my parents have been good at saying, you know what, we're done with that place. And they have followed us from church to church, which I find interesting.
Your trajectory out of fundamentalism, they followed you guys. Yeah. His parents are very supportive of putting what I admire about Nate's family, and I'm just going to speak on that, like, because I know your family, is they have supported you guys above religion, which is so rare and so precious and so beautiful. Like the value of their own kids came first, and it was like, you guys have been hurt by the church, then we're moving out of this environment.
But also, there are still some blind spots, right? They're still evangelical. They're floundering because they can't, they cannot find
a non-toxic evangelical church. How come? Why?
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Yeah.
No, really, it's nobody's fault. I mean, that's a history thing as well. Like, really, again, with the technology and the connectedness that people are getting, there's no way that people knew 10 years ago the amount or had that connectivity, that familiarity with connectivity and all these relationships that we've got now. I mean, that was in no way a criticism. It's just so severe, and it is so sad. And we all understand their grief as well.
Yeah.
You know, like
And one of the things
trying
too
hard.
that I feel and I recognize in them, I saw in myself when friends of my own were walking away from evangelical Christianity.
Which was what, fear?
Yeah, that sense of like fear, that sense of grieving the connection that we had, because it was the one thing that we had in common. Because I didn't know anything else about those friends.
You form those whole relationships around God rather than, or around this belief system you have rather than around you as individual people.
a little culture, a little community, and I mean, then you're becoming colleagues as well, and teammates, and brothers in the Lord. I mean, these are really close bonds.
Exactly, it is, but then there's nothing else once that's gone. What
Okay.
else?
Once you're no longer teammates.
Almost sounds like drug using community. Like once everyone gets sober, they've got nothing in common anymore.
Right. You know, you're chasing that Jesus high together, but when that's no longer available, when it no longer hits,
What community do you have left? And what bond do you have left?
yeah,
And what do you
It's-
think? I mean, you're still in touch with people, right? What's that like?
I'm less in touch with people from who are still there. I mean, I do have one person in my life who's still inside Hillsong, and it's tough. It's tough watching them
You just don't discuss it.
justify. Yeah, we just don't discuss it. We don't talk about it. But as far as the people on the outside, I think, you know, that since we've all left, there's that sort of rekindling of friendships, building of new friendships.
Tonight when we were talking with this friend from Hillsong, he was like, they mentioned someone else they knew who got out, and his friend was like, and they got out, and I was so excited. And I was like, I feel like that's the vibe of finding out someone, and that shows how toxic the place is, how excited they all get at knowing someone else broke free of such a toxic, it shows the oppressiveness of the environment, of how excited they get about someone making it out, and how
And
controlling
having
their
that courage and knowing, because you know that kind of insanity and that lack of clarity and like, how do I ever know if I'm doing the right thing? And then you like, I'm okay, and there isn't one right thing, and you know, it's
and honestly,
exciting to
there's
someone else get that.
Yeah. And there's an excitement in wondering, like, what can we connect over? There's certainly something beyond the whole Jesus thing or the whole church, the church machine. Like, there's something there that drew me to them besides all of this.
something about their personality, something about who they are as an individual, not the superficial.
But while we were stuck in that daily Hillsong grind, I never got to know who they really were. And the excitement of knowing that they're out and the possibility,
you could get to know them.
yeah, the possibility of building that friendship apart from all of that is exciting.
That's nice, isn't it? Because you almost were held prisoner, by some coercive control.
Oh, you're saying it
gaslighting
so
techniques.
well, Tanya.
Yes.
And it's like you all got out and you're having like a prison reunion. It's like really nice. I know what I'm talking about, right? It's just like one big minimum security prison, this country. So, wow. What advice do you give to somebody who is totally immersed in this? And I mean, from your cultural perspective as an American, because it is such a different culture to ours and to others. You know, somebody who's been raised in the church, in the school, in the college, in the training, and the family, the whole thing. You know,
I similarly to what you said on our podcast, I would encourage people to question everything and to
That was a really good point of yours, Tanya. Yeah.
Exactly. Like I do love what you said. Just question, just ask questions.
terrifying. I mean, that's
And
the
it
most
is terrifying. It is incredibly terrifying. But the thing is, on the other side, I think there's a sense of freedom in knowing that you're not just covering over things with pat answers.
Giving God glory.
Yeah.
Jesus is doing something nebulous that no one can define, even though the visuals and the actual optics of what's really happening don't match up. But you have to put a nice spin on everything.
Because it's so painful and so, like, with who we are as people. Like, I would advise people, listen to your body. Listen to what your body is telling you, because it really goes against your body to live with all this cognitive dissonance when you see what's happening all around you and you have to tell yourself, well, no, there's something good here. But how can it be good if it just keeps happening over and over and over again? You know, we were talking I think on our podcast about the theme of sexual abuse and sexual trauma and rape. I mean, like, you know, it's not just Carl, it's not just Darnell, it's not just Reed, it keeps coming up over and over and over again. And at some point you have to say, God is not in this. There's nothing good in
There's
here.
no baby in the bathwater.
Yeah, the baby
I like
is gone.
to say the
Yes, that's what
baby has
Gail likes to
grown
say.
up and flipped over the table. And you need to move on.
Yeah.
He's flipped over the table.
Yeah. Yeah. Because people say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The baby's left. The baby's gone. Not in the tub anymore.
I mean, it's another really remarkable thing about you is that you're male and you're speaking out loud. Now, women, I guess, write and connect more socially anyway, but the majority of the contact that I have is initiated by women talking about trauma and grief. And it's only been recently, in the last couple of years, I've realized, hang on, she's got a husband in the other room who's not even speaking because he's so grief-struck. The same things that, this concept of family and community and my brothers and my, maybe my substitute father and bro, you're looking, that's what we saw from over here. It was like, looking good, bro, bro, all of this, bro. And I can't imagine what that's like for men to have that taken away from them or realize that they were lied to or coerced or, that's killer, literally killer.
Yeah, I think...
So you're such a unicorn.
Look, maybe I'm a little hard on I'm a little hard on men, but honestly, I'm like, I think grow up. Like everybody goes through it. Like, yes, it is. It's a huge knock and it's painful, but you know what? Like, you're capable. People have walked these paths, and if you're incapable of it, go to therapy. God, like the amount of healing and help that can be had in just talking to a counselor, in just working through things, processing whatever pain you've gone through. And yeah, look, I mean, that's the thing too. Like we're socialized and conditioned to not lean on each other emotionally because God forbid we look like a woman. God, is that even like, that's the thing too. It's like the worst thing that you could imagine. It's an insult to a man to like act like a woman. But like, no, seriously.
Learn from them.
Yeah.
Learn from how women can.
Yeah.
Men have high suicide rates for a reason.
Yeah.
They do statistically have high suicide rates because they don't know how to function with emotional depth and revealing what. I want to give Nate some credit because I know in the support group, you were in a support group for Hillsong, you were the only dude. And there was a big group.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was the only male presenting person in the...
How did you find the support group? What was
so
it like?
we, like outside of the Hillsong conversation, Gail and I on our podcast, we talk a lot about different types of religious trauma, different organizations and different churches. And we brought on to our podcast, Kayla Felton, who is one of the founders of an organization called Reclamation Collective. And unfortunately, it's only available in North America, but they provide both clinical and non-clinical.
The non-clinical is so that those who are outside of the U.S. can get support too.
Right.
Because if it's clinical, then it's only going to be available to those who have insurance.
Right.
Right.
But they provide both clinical and non-clinical support. In mental health support for people who suffered religious trauma, adverse religious experiences, so on and so forth. So
licensed professionals who are trained in this.
They are licensed, they're clinicians, they're trained. So we had a conversation with Kayla and have developed a little bit of an online friendship, and then had the opportunity to meet in person as well. But then Kayla made me aware, along with a few other Hillsong survivors who were situated in North America and one or two outside, that they were providing, given what had happened and all the news dropping and the Discovery Plus documentary coming out, just how traumatizing it is to revisit all of that and not have a support system in place. So they provided a 10-week support group for Hillsong survivors free of charge. And I ended up joining that group. I also found my therapist through Reclamation Collective. A bad experience with a therapist previously. I was looking for a therapist who was at least informed in religious trauma.
When you've been through religious trauma, you really need someone who has a grasp on that, because it's such a unique, hard, difficult experience to go through.
Yeah. So I found my therapist through the Reclamation Collective, my current therapist through the Reclamation Collective.
They have a directory.
Yeah, so they have a directory for people. So any of your listeners who are in North America, they do have a directory. Availability in Canada is very slim. I think they have like 1 or 2 providers in Canada, but they do have a directory of North American clinicians who if you're looking for a therapist, and many of them take your standard state insurance. So if you are in network, you can find a provider. So for those of you in North America who are listening, I would highly recommend.
Not that women don't need help, but men have a hard time seeking out help.
America. It's exciting. I mean, it's being now measured and treated like any other kind of real experience that has after effects, instead of like, you never prayed enough was the only other answer we ever got. So go read your Bible more and tithe and you'll feel better.
Yeah.
So
I learned this year for the first time the difference between PTSD and CPTSD. And I don't know if this will be helpful for your listeners, but your podcast is Leaving Hillsong, Leavers and Believers. And I love your tagline. But like, I think for those who are leaving, I only learned about this year is PTSD is often like, when you have a traumatic situation, like someone dies in front of you or something tragic happens that's a moment in time. But CPTSD is complicated PTSD, and complex. That's complex. Yeah. Thank you. It's complex PTSD, and that could be a religious training throughout your lifetime of teaching you things that downgrade your self-esteem and your belief in yourself, and you're worthless, and thinking you're crazy. That can be complex PTSD, and it's not a moment in time. It's a bunch of moments strung together to create in you the inability, like all the effects of PTSD and more. I think like that's been eye-opening for me. It's just the trauma that comes with a lot of religious indoctrination.
Because you have like things will happen. Your brain just does a thing, and you're like, what the hell am I experiencing? What is this? Why do I feel this way? I don't have PTSD. I didn't suffer that kind of trauma.
Right.
But then, but religion does a thing to you. Like it really does.
We were having this conversation before before I started recording about just what it's like to be afraid you're going to go to hell as a kid. What it's like to just fear all the training.
Rapture, right? We were talking about feeling like worrying about being left behind or what's going to happen to those left behind. Like
someone saying, don't worry about it until the afterlife. And why when you're raised with that, you can't do that because you have been scared and petrified and like taught into, kids praying the prayer or the salvation prayer over and over and over every night because they're so scared they miss something in it and they're going to get, or their parents disappear and they're like, they didn't find them in the store that they were in and they thought their parents got raptured. Like it's trauma that evangelical kids go through that's terrifying.
And yet there's nothing tangible. And this is the problem. So there's no earthquake. There is no car accident. So whatever it is you're complaining about, it must be all in your head and stuff because you're the only one who's suffering. Everybody else seems to be doing all right. And I think that's really clever as well. One of the famous pastors apparently used to say back in the day, there's a lot of money to be made in the invisible. There's also like zero responsibility with the invisible, I guess, as well.
You mentioned the idea that you're the only one. That's gaslighting. That is what that term is like trying to make you feel crazy, trying to make you feel like it's all in your head. Yeah. That's what the term gaslighting is. And religious systems will try and give you that in order for you to doubt yourself. And I think that's important for people to hear you are not alone. Like you, Tanya, realizing you're not alone as you're interviewing people, as you're hearing these stories. Everyone didn't turn out okay. All these stories you were fed that everyone else has moved on and they're all doing great in life and you're the only one left behind is not true. And as we share our stories, we start to realize, oh, wow, this whole system has created a lot of us who are victims of a bigger problem. Like, it wasn't that we did something wrong and we're the ones who are in the wrong path. No, we're all getting, like, most people are getting harmed by this whole system. A lot of people are getting seriously harmed.
Apart from, I think, the very few people that benefit from the system. I just don't, do you know what I mean? It's almost like a factory kind of assembly line. I don't see how it's producing vastly different results.
No. Like even beyond Hillsong, like what? Just recently we saw the Village Church in Texas deal with this thing. And like, look, these are the headline grabbing ones because they're, thousands of members in these congregations, Mark Driscoll's church, Hillsong. But then there's those smaller churches with like just a few hundred people in their congregation that experience the same kinds of implosions and are replicating. Like these pastors are just preying on people. They're predators, and evangelicalism is replicating this. Like like you said, off a factory line. Yeah. And this is what I was talking about before, as Janice says often, they're cowards. So they're not, and the thing is, they're cowards, and they know they're in the wrong. There's no way they can spin it to look good. Sure, maybe they come forward and try to paint a narrative ahead of time, but they're not going to do it on our shows. And many of their stories have already been told. Like between your podcast, our podcast, Janice's podcast, whoever else is telling Hillsong stories. A lot of those stories are coming out, and they will continue to come out between the Discovery Plus documentary and those stories are going to continue to come out.
There's also seems to be no consequence either, so they can kind of do what they like. And
they're off.
What are you going to do about it? Yeah,
right. They're off like, oh, we're just going to move to Hawaii and start another church called
Start the
right.
No, it's the.
Even though is in
the is in the.
It's like that little arrow in FedEx, right? It's just crazy.
Yeah, the little arrow in there. But at least that's clever, and visually you're like, oh, that's a thing. Oh, look at that. That's a thing that's in there. With it's like, really? That's the best you got? The inside the.
Just kitschy. That's all it is.
All that it takes to suck people in.
Oh, it really is.
How long after walking away did you meet this lovely Gail? Or did you meet him?
Yeah. So I left Hillsong in 2017. After leaving Hillsong, I got involved in a number of ex-evangelical communities online. You know, we're all trauma bonding. And there was, I hate to use the word drama because it's more than drama. There was trauma involved. There was abuse, but there was some drama. One of my friends had been involved in it, was one of the victims of some further abuse outside of the evangelical.
Because people carry it with them outside.
Because people carry the toxicity
They leave a community
with them.
with misogyny and homophobia, and they bring it into the deconstruction post-evangelical world. They haven't figured out how to get rid of that part.
Right. And so
maybe they're
I was
just attracted to a system of sexism.
Right.
But anyway.
And now they think they're safe because now they're atheists, but they still haven't actually unpacked.
Well, in this particular group, they weren't atheists. They were still Christian. They were just trying to find another non-evangelical expression. But there was just no accountability. Anyway, so some stuff had gone down, and one of my friends had posted some things about what had taken place, and I, was commenting there, and Gail was apparently involved with that group of people as well, trying to help them tell their story of being abused.
I kind of knew them individually, and they were telling me their stories with this organization that was supposed to be helping people but was doing the opposite. And I was like, you guys were all a member of the same group. Maybe you should tell your stories as a group. Like we've talked about, there's power in numbers when you realize you're not alone and that a lot of people have dealt with something. So they put their story together, and they ended up telling it. And I was behind the scenes encouraging them along, and Nate was friends with some of them. And so he just was like, I'm so sorry that you girls have been through this. And I was being silly because I saw Nate had a hockey jersey from my city, and I was surprised. I thought, oh, he must be from Montreal, and he's not. He's from the New York City area. So I was like, wait, how did you become a Montreal Canadiens fan? And I started a side conversation, not on the topic at all, the very serious discussion that was going down. And, Nate felt a little embarrassed. He didn't realize behind the scenes I was really good friends with all these girls and these women, and they weren't upset at me at all. They knew I was fully supportive of them when I changed the topic. But Nate slid into my DMs. He got all sneaky, and he was like, okay, we'll get into our hockey talk, but I don't want to blow up. I don't want to blow up their notifications with hockey stuff. So we just start.
Essentially, you bonded over a really aggressive sport. So it's like a Lentz marriage anyway, right? Made in heaven. That's so nice. It's beautiful. And now you're going to get married, and things will be fine.
We're engaged. We're getting married next year. We're still doing long distance right now from Montreal to New York City, and it's we did this through the pandemic. It's been 3.5 years of trying to figure this out with closed borders and making it work. And now the borders are open, we can drive the 5.5 hours to see each other, which is nice. And I'm looking forward to getting married.
Yeah.
Do you notice differences in your relationship styles now? And I know this is huge, but is there? Do you approach relationships differently, perhaps, than you might have? I don't know.
We definitely met at an interesting point because both of us were in the middle of deconstruction from evangelicalism, and Nate was further along than me. I still really believe there's a God out there and doing good stuff. And I was also coming out of a 20-year marriage and getting divorced, got married way too young. I think you understand me totally, Tanya, but had kids super young, and that's what you're supposed to do, and then you got to stick with it no matter what, even when it's damaging to you. And eventually came out of that, and Nate was an amazing friend and an amazing support, and somebody could bounce thoughts about asking the wrong questions that you're not allowed to ask in evangelicalism, having discussions about very real topics about spirituality that you're not supposed to ask, okay, where in the Bible does it talk about hell? And what did that actually mean? And all these foundational things we were taught just doesn't add up. The math doesn't add up. The original language does not reflect what we've been told in our churches. And we just started having really neat conversations together as friends, and ended up having a very enriched, meaningful relationship where for sure there's trauma bonding that came from our past experience, but just a willingness to meet each other where we're at. I remember, I'll give one little anecdote to finish this story between Nate and I, but my sister said, your beliefs have changed a lot. And I know in the Bible, there's that verse about not being unequally yoked. And my ex and I we had the same belief systems about Jesus and everything, but our values didn't line up. I mean, when it comes to empathy, caring for others, we were always arguing about how to, what our values were. And we were always taught unequally yoked meant Christian, non-Christian together. And my sister was like, well, what if your beliefs change? And what I realized with Nate is our values really lined up. We both cared about loving people and being kind and being thoughtful humans. And whether our beliefs change in the future, that didn't matter. It was we share values in common, and that's so much bigger. And I wish someone would have said unequally yoked could mean not sharing values rather than not having the exact same. Do you believe in Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior? If not, then you're going to hell. It was so much deeper than that.
Yeah,
and at
the time, we didn't necessarily even believe similarly about God.
We were in the exact same place belief wise. And we've both changed, and we continue to evolve and change as people in our beliefs. But sharing values of caring for others, of loving people, of empathy, of fighting against injustice, of caring about marginalized people, we've always been on, Nate and I have been on the same page.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I want to end there, please. That's beautiful.
Yes, absolutely.
Is that okay? I just think that's gorgeous. It's
totally. And anyone who wants to follow us on Full Mutuality, it kind of is an extension of that thought process. Yeah. It's what we do together as a couple. We podcast on being fully mutual in all those kind of ways. And
that is so interesting. That is so beautiful. That they're, I don't know, I guess not these external standards of righteousness, but these personalized standards of shared good, and that's not going to change. And
I mean, it has for each other to change our beliefs and to still have the same values,
Yeah.
Wow. That is a really wonderful marriage of values. That's nice. I'm going to be all cliche and stuff, but that's great. I mean, wishing you all the very best.
We have some sneaky stuff in the works that we haven't announced yet. That's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Hey, we kind of messed around with the record and didn't say goodbye, but that was just such an insightful, fantastic interview. These are questions that people are asking everywhere. How could such people do such things? How can things be so not as they appear? And they're complex questions, and there's no answers, but I really do believe it's about continuing to ask those questions to kind of say, who am I going to hold responsible for what, and what am I willing to let go, and what am I happy with? Because, it's so difficult looking at big picture stuff and knowing where to start. Gail and Nate have their own pod, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Please check it out. It's called Full Mutuality, as they told you. It's part of a network of evangelical podcasts called Dauntless. So, as Nate has mentioned, he's got a friend who does one on education in Christian evangelicalism, and, there's a range of other hosts. Check them all out. They're all in contact and they're all cross-promoting, and the network is growing. It's wonderful. So Full Mutuality Pod, and Dauntless is the network. As for little old Leaving Hillsong, we've had a lot going on in the company, I must say. A little bit of a TV appearance on Sunrise. The Breakfast Show had one of those on Friday, and it looks like there's going to be another one tomorrow. Vanity Fair has put out an exceptional documentary. I was so happy this interview was here for when this docuseries or whatever they're called arrived. Nate and Gail and I actually spent quite a few hours talking, and we, as you know, interviewed each other, and their interview with me is out already. Neither of us kind of wanted to attack this kind of really long conversation. And I was like, oh, what are we going to do? And then getting closer to this Secrets of Hillsong Vanity Fair doc, it was like, man, Carl is getting platformed on this trailer that we saw. It was like, oh no. I've just heard from people who had experienced all of this damage. And then I think watching this documentary, which, you know, frustratingly is not available outside of the US through Hulu at the moment, I've just absolutely loved the things that Nate has to say because it just underpins it. Make sure you watch it if you can. It's an incredible piece of film. And Nate's just strengthening all of the statements about the power imbalances and the damage done. So thankful to you, Nate and Gail. Super, super thankful to you, leavers and listeners and believers and friends. And I'm just so grateful for the strength and reassurance that your messages and comments and feedback provide. Thank you so, so much for your support. Thanks to my patrons for really standing up for me and supporting this work when I just need it most. You know, you see all this media and stuff and we make it look like a lot of fun, but nobody gets paid in these things because everybody's so offended by the idea of checkbook journalism. So unless you're some kind of super exclusive story, we don't get paid for interviews, most of us that you will see on the thing. So it's all just smoke and mirrors. Really appreciate all your support in all the ways it comes. It's just thank you, thank you. Stay tuned on social media. Facebook and Insta is about pretty much all I can keep up with, and you know, updates will be there and things seem to be moving pretty quickly. I do think this documentary, The Secrets of Hillsong, will have quite an impact. It's pretty hard hitting. And of course, I will keep you up to date if someone remembers this island on which we are stranded and all the other people who just aren't in the US. And as soon as we can get together and have a little watch together, that'll be on socials too. Look after yourselves. There's fun times ahead. So, you know, make kindness your superpower. People find it pretty hard to battle against kind. And so if you're going to do that, you know, be kind to yourself. It's a way of being, to be kind to those around you. A little corner of the earth. You don't have to, you know, solve world hunger. Help the next person out. So keep leaving Hillsong, and we will talk soon.